in Friday night. She said, "Dad, you just write an introduction, have something to say, and then at the end make it really powerful." And I was like, "Oh, well, thanks." But I woke up and I finally did this. Look, I've been a professional educator for over 20 years. Elementary school, middle school, college. 3 years ago, my wife and my son, Luke, and I went to a parent conference with Luke's language arts teacher. She was concerned, and so were we. His grades were dropping. So we met and we found out that Luke was having problems completing writing prompts. As an example, his teacher handed us one of Luke's papers and it had a big 0 on it. What was wrong, my wife and I wondered? Luke's teacher asked him to help explain his errors. You see, the writing prompt had asked Luke to, quote, write about the 2 most exciting times you have had with your family. Luke's teacher handed Luke his paper and asked him to read his response. Luke read, "Woo-hoo! Let me tell you about my great family vacation to the Adirondack Mountains." Luke's teacher interrupted, "Hold right there. Now, Luke, explain to your mom and dad what's wrong with your response." Luke, slightly embarrassed, replied, "Well, woo-hoo is not a sentence, and writing prompts must always start by restating the prompt as the opening statement." Luke's teacher looked at my wife and I and simply said, "That's the problem. If he did that on the PSSA, he would be scored a 0. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was under tremendous pressure to make sure that her kids score well on PSSAs. I was angry. My wife was angry. Luke was actually experimenting with writing and trying to communicate to his readers a sense of excitement. Woo-hoo! But this disastrous system, PSSAs, was forcing his teachers to comply with the powers that be. The PSSAs were forcing Luke to parrot sentences in a preordained structure so that low-paid temp workers would be able to score it. That was the moment when my wife and I decided that something had to be done. We weren't exactly sure what to do, but we had to do something. So after some discussion, we decided that Luke was not going to take the PSSAs. Our son was not going to participate in a system that was forcing teachers to comply with educational mandates constructed by politicians and other reformers who have absolutely no credentials in education. We were not going to allow Luke to provide data to a system that was really designed to prove that Luke, the teacher, the school, and the community were failing. We were opting out. So after one appearance on CNN and Fox, I, along with some 5 other educators and parents and idealistic radicals, founded United Opt-out National. And for the last 3 years, we've been spreading the message of opt-out across the country. We've committed ourselves to ending this system of comply or be punished education. Or as we say on our webpage, quote, we are committed to ending corporate-driven, test-mandated education reform. Locally, that means that I have essentially made myself available to any individual or group interested in opting out of this punishing system. Look, learning that you have to write for a low-paid temp worker to make sure that you get the right score so that a teacher and a school won't get punished is not the learning I want for my child or any child in public schools. That is not the promise of public education. That is not accountability. I want to end by reading a letter that I wrote to teachers in Seattle. Now, if you haven't heard, which of course you probably haven't because the media has been squashing this story, but teachers in Seattle have organized their own opt-out movement. Teachers, not parents, are refusing to administer the high-stakes test called the MAP. So I wrote, "Dear Seattle teachers, stay strong. As this opt-out continues to grow, and I believe it will, advocating for authentic assessment is absolutely essential. The reality is that any high-stakes standardized test is always going to be an invalid indicator of student learning. Start using the words and language of learning over terms such as achievement and growth. These terms are embedded in the high-stakes standardized testing narrative, a reform narrative that exploits terms such as achievement and growth to avoid talking about what really matters, learning. Therefore, authentic assessment under the direction of professional teachers is the only type of assessment that can truly demonstrate learning. This is so key in the larger fight against the reform movement. The reform story is all about achievement scores and rankings and presents this false story of failing public schools. This story rests on scores from standardized achievement tests that purposely distort the reality so that the public believes achievement and learning are synonymous. The real issue is the civil rights violation that has occurred during the reform movement's reign of testing. Yes, there is a gap. However, we know the last 10 years has done nothing to improve that gap. In fact, the real gap has actually increased for all kids, but poor minority kids have been damaged to an even larger extent. They have been denied a fully funded public school experience. A rich experience in the arts, music, physical education, history, and other content areas has been cut because they simply are not tested. Seattle opt-out is truly a movement in support of restoring and in a lot of cases finally providing a fully funded and supported public education to children that have for decades been excluded from this fundamental right due to the fact that they live in poverty. Once we change the narrative, once we reveal the reform movement for what it truly is, a massive civil rights violation that has denied a generation of children a powerful education, the public will continue to support you. This is a fight to provide the children of this country a solid and powerful education that will allow them to think critically and imagine new possibilities. This is advocating for the ultimate freedoms. The freedom to think, the freedom to imagine, the freedom to create, and the freedom to dream. No more false labels of failing, below basic, needs improvement, and not adequate. This is the language imposed on us by standardized tests as pushed by the reformers. It is meant to destroy powerful public schooling and relegate most children to menial jobs in a dead-end economy that only creates wealth for the powerful. No more. My children, your children, deserve the same type of educational experience that the powerful demand for their children. This truly is the civil rights fight of our generation. In solidarity, Tim Slecker, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Slecker will be available in the lobby in a few moments after we close here to have a continued discussion with anyone who's curious about opting out. He'll be able to answer questions for you so you can join him in a conversation there. After we're done, we're going to be showing a documentary entitled Brooklyn Castle.